Cool. Awesome. Let's do this. All right, let's kick this off. Welcome to the second edition of Women in Climate Catalyze, our virtual format for our members from around the world to come together, hear about the climate work other members of our community are doing, and do some networking. And speaking of networking, in case you're wondering who's in the Zoom room with you today, we will be dropping a link in the chat to a Google Sheet where you can add your contact information. So it's easy for you to reach out to other people, continue the conversation, and stay in touch beyond our session today. I'd also love to give a quick shout out to Sarah for helping us project manage Catalyze and helping make this happen. Thank you so much, Sarah. As I mentioned, this is only our second time doing Catalyze, so we would really appreciate your feedback. We have prepared a brief survey that will be dropping the link in the chat. And yeah, we would love for you to maybe open this up in a separate tab and complete it closer to the end of today's session, but we really want to incorporate your feedback in future editions of Catalyze. Oop, yep. And next slide. So what is Women in Climate and who are we? Women in Climate is a nonprofit that aims to create a joyful and safe space for women to learn and talk about climate. This is an inclusive and welcoming space. You don't have to be in climate to be a member. We have many members actually who are not working in climate yet, but are interested in learning more, maybe look into transitioning into the climate space one day, or are interested in volunteering or starting a side project in climate. And that's pretty much my story, actually. I met Michelle through my former full-time job where I was building community and educational programs for founders. And once I met Michelle, I decided I wanted to help her build and grow the Women in Climate community. And now over to Michelle. Please share a little bit about your background and about the beginnings of Women in Climate and everything that has happened since you hosted our very first dinner in New York back in February of this year, almost a year ago. Crazy.
Perfect. Thank you, Stephanie. If you can move to the next slide. So I started Women in Climate in part because I wanted, more people to see how fun and how fulfilling it would be to work in climate. My background is in technology. I used to work for Salesforce and DocuSign, and I had so many wonderful colleagues that really enjoyed the philanthropic part of the job, doing volunteer days and getting involved. I hosted a Veganuary one year in our London office, and I wanted to remove the barrier for more people to work on climate. And I also wanted to create a safe space for women. And so that's kind of a little bit of the inspiration around our dinners and our gatherings. As you can see, we've done quite a few. We come together, we share vegan food, we talk about Netflix, and we talk about climate as well. And we've activated not only New York, but Boston, Toronto, London, Paris, and Berlin. And as this group grew, I realized that I really also wanted to make a platform for more women who are already taking climate action, to give them a voice for them to share their solutions and their ideas and their perspectives. And so, Catalyze is one example. During our celebration in New York Climate Week, we had an event with over 100 people in person, all women speakers, celebrating all the women who are taking climate action. So this is a thriving community. If you're not part of our Slack group already, please join that. That's where Stephanie gives us lots of love weekly, making sure we're a vibrant community. Next slide, Stephanie. So at Women in Climate, we support the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I'd love to get a pulse in the chat. Have you heard about the goals before, and do you use them in your organization? I'm going to be checking out the chat now. Part of the reason I ask is because, despite working in a lot of these companies who really value philanthropy and volunteer, I didn't learn about the goals until after I left those companies. And I think that they're a really great way to frame sort of our challenge. It's not, a one-shot solution. We have to take into account all these different types of goals, and there's 17 in total. And so it looks like a lot of people are already really familiar. So awesome to see that. So next slide, please, Stephanie. I recently just came back from COP27 in Egypt as well, representing women in climate, and it was a really incredible experience, to say the least. I was drinking through the fire hose and learning as I go. And on December 11th, if you're in New York, there's going to be another COP in Montreal, and that COP is focused on biodiversity. And on Sunday, there's going to be live programming available. So if you are in New York, or if you just want to watch the live programming, you can head over to our events page. There's a sign up there, and there's a link to the live stream as well. On December 14th, I'm going to be joined by Emily McGlone, as well as Frances Fuller, and we're going to be reviewing COP with people who are interested in learning, what's it like to go to COP? How is it different from previous years? And Emily's gone for many years. And Frances, who I met recently, literally I met her at the gym. She had a water bottle that said climate on it. So obviously I had to talk to her. And she was actually part of the negotiations. And she is going to be joining us and sharing her reflections as well, which is really, really cool, because I have no idea what it's like to be in a negotiating room. Then on December 15th, for those that did attend COP, we're going to be doing a little bit of a debrief, talking about what went well for women, what can go better, and looking forward to COP28. So all of the links to those can be found on the events page on our website. Next up. So we are going to be pretty busy for the holidays. London, Berlin, and New York are all hosting parties. The New York party is sold out, but London and Berlin, I believe, still have spots open. Berlin actually might be sold out as well, but there's a big team in London organizing. Emily Walter is organizing in Berlin. So again, head over to our events page to check that out. And I'm also going to be holding a city leads sort of intro and welcome. So if you're interested in organizing an event in the future, look out for this activation. It'll be in our newsletter. If you are not on our newsletter yet, it is on our website. You can subscribe very easily. Next slide. If you are in a position to help us and support us, we would really appreciate it. There are lots of different things that we need to account for, from software to event expenses. And if you are able to buy us a coffee each month, that would be amazing. There is a QR code there, so you can use your phone, and we'll also drop the link into the chat box. Any support is greatly appreciated, and anything over $30, if you would like one of our Women in Climate pins, we'll make them available at a local New York retailer. So if you don't live in New York, you can have a friend go and pick it up for you. Okay. Wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. Now let's take a look at today's agenda. So we just almost done with our welcome, and we'll hear from our sponsor, GridRewards. Then we'll hear from our two speakers, Ashyln and Laura. There will be a short Q&A following both talks, so please be prepared to ask questions. Then after that, we'll move to our networking portion for the day, and then closing for today. And just a quick heads up, during the networking session, there will be breakout rooms. I know not everyone's on camera while listening to speakers. That's totally okay. While we always love for you to be on camera, we also know sometimes people are doing other things or have to do other things at the same time. Totally fine. But for the breakout rooms, please be prepared to be ready to go, be on camera, and engage with whoever you'll be thrown in a breakout room with. We'll be giving another heads up right before that happens. It will happen after the speaker portion. All right, and now let's hear from our sponsor, GridRewards. Thank you so much for supporting the second edition of Catalyze. A very warm welcome to Serena, who will tell us a little more about GridRewards. And I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that, but personally, I have a very, I love GridRewards. I'm a proud user of GridRewards. Serena, over to you.
We love that you love GridRewards. Thanks for the warm welcome. My name is Serena Miller. I am the Director of Engagement and Impact for GridRewards. And for those of you that do not know what GridRewards is, GridRewards, launched in 2021, is a mobile and web-based app that allows users insight into their energy usage. So once linked with your Con Edison account, you're able to see and track the real-time energy consumption in both kilowattage as well as dollars. In addition to that, you're also able to track your carbon emissions. And so one of the impactful pieces of this app is that 24/7, the app provides insights on when the best or the worst times to use electricity throughout the day, so that you're tracking and able to actually control this, which is one of our models is shift the power. We're shifting the power to the small energy user, us, if you will, to be able to take that control and be able to see their usage and actually control, if you will. During the summer, we allow our participants to be more impactful through what's called demand response. And during this time, there are times throughout the summer where our users are contacted to reduce their energy consumption during a certain time. So this will be on a certain day, maybe a 2 to 4 hour window. And with their participation, collectively, it becomes a virtual power plant that actually helps when the grid is the most stressed. So by everyone collectively reducing, you actually help the grid when the grid is the most stressed, so that peaker plants aren't and that do not have to be put on, which are no good for the environment. I'll stop there if there are any questions or okay. And if you want to know more about GridRewards, currently we are in the New York City area, Westchester, California, and we are looking to branch out in more cities in the near future.
And that's where we can find GridRewards. I personally learned so much about where electricity is coming from and what I can do through checking the GridRewards app on a regular basis, especially like on hot summer days. And it feels good to know that there are things you can do to help the grid and have an impact on a personal level. So thank you for sharing, Serena, and highly encourage everyone to follow and check this out. All right, let's hear from our first speaker, Ashyln Anderson. So excited to have you here, Ashyln. Also, for our audience, if you have any questions for Ashyln and for our other speaker later, Laura, feel free to drop those in the chat throughout the talks. We'll have 5 minutes for Q&A after each talk, so that you have time to get any burning questions off your chest. And Ashyln, the stage is now yours.
All right, well, thank you, Stephanie and Michelle. I first heard about Women in Climate during New York Climate Week, and I'm really grateful for the community you're creating and happy to be here and share a bit. I am going to start with just a little bit of my background in climate work and also some of the perspectives I bring. As Michelle mentioned, we all kind of come to this work with different experiences and perspectives. So I wanted to start by highlighting some of that. I started my climate career at a policy-focused firm called Albright-Stonebridge Group that Madeleine Albright also actually started after her time as Secretary of State, based in Washington, D.C. And originally we weren't working in corporate sustainability, but I helped start the team to work with companies on their corporate sustainability strategies. And this was at a time when a lot of companies were just starting to announce net zero carbon neutral commitments. So it was a super interesting time. And I decided to apply to business school in 2019. This was pre-pandemic, with the intention to keep doing corporate sustainability work. But by the time I started school, the world was very different. And I ended up spending quite a bit of my time during grad school working on another passion of mine, which is end-of-life care and grief. And so last summer, I actually worked at a cremation company, and it was doing this work during the pandemic that came to really influence the way that I think about climate change and how we process loss and change to our surroundings and ways of life. But I actually came back around to climate work while I was in school because I heard about a climate tech company called Cervest that was working more on the climate adaptation side of things. And what Cervest is working to do is take the latest and greatest climate science and climate models and downscale that information to the level of an asset, whether that's a house, a hospital, anything in the built environment, and then empower people with an understanding of how climate change is likely to affect them and their assets. And that's by hazard type, like precipitation, flooding, wildfire. That's in different climate scenarios. So our product allows you to look at that across different scenarios, also across different time horizons from now until 2100. And I found this really compelling because, to me, a really important barrier to climate action is our ability to internalize what it really means for our lives and to imagine the differences that are possible in our future realities based on the actions that we take today. And that sounds really simple, but I think it is hard, and it's a challenge to our imaginations. And maybe the link to grief and end of life issues seems tenuous, and I'm always up to talk more about that. But I see a lot of parallels in climate work and our ability to confront hard realities and to move past denial and to believe that we have agency right now to change what the future looks like. And so Cervest is really what brought me back to climate work. What they're doing really resonated with me. So I joined them full-time after school as a policy and advocacy expert. And this is a really critical time for climate policy. Oh, Stephanie, could you go to the next slide as well? Yes, thank you. Yes, this is really critical time for climate policy as it relates to climate risk and what that risk looks like in the future. So I lead our policy engagement work, and we're particularly focused right now on climate disclosure and reporting rules. And I'm sure many of you have heard of the SEC's proposal that we're expecting to see in early 2023. That's going to require public companies to start disclosing what climate risk looks like across their business. And this is just one, but a very significant example of all kinds of policies that are popping up around the world. We're also expecting next year to see standards from the International Sustainability Standards Board that was announced at COP26. And hopefully that global framework will both reinforce this movement we're seeing in the policy world toward more disclosure and reporting, and also bring some standardization to the requirements and how that information is reported. As someone working for a technology company with a team of incredible climate scientists and engineers who are making this information accessible, another part of my job is making sure that policymakers know what technology solutions exist and how that can support this market movement that policymakers are trying to push. Another part of my job is supporting our customers who are trying to make sense of this patchwork of climate disclosure and reporting rules that are going on, and informing them about how one of our main products, EarthScan, can support them in disclosing their climate risks. And then lastly, I try to feed a lot of what's happening in the policy world back into our product roadmap to make sure that we are able to meet the needs of, for example, companies who are facing these reporting requirements, but also other actors who can make use of this information. Next slide. And this is important because the impacts of climate change are here and accelerating, and that's becoming very real in headlines. Even in this past year, there's record disasters that we've seen, as well as the acknowledgement of the need for loss and damage, which was a major outcome of COP27. Because even if we meet net zero goals tomorrow, which this is incredibly important, I don't think adaptation should at all take away from the energy toward mitigation. But there are physical changes that are locked into our systems that we need to be prepared for. And that involves empowering a lot of people with the information they need to make climate adaptation decisions. And my work on climate disclosure policies is a step toward this. These policies help to surface the information and bring transparency But disclosure alone is not enough. The information also needs to be useful for decision making, and it needs to be convincing and clear enough to change behaviors and change strategies. And it's only then that we can really reckon with our climate reality. Also incredibly important, there's huge implications for who has access to this information and who's able to make use of it. As we all know, climate change does not impact everyone equally, and the global South, BIPOC, and low-income people are set to suffer most, not just due to geographic location, but also resource distribution and who is leading these efforts. So it's important that we at Cervest and other providers like us pursue partnerships with NGOs and climate justice organizations that are trying to address this gap. Okay, and next slide, the fun part of this presentation. This is something I think about a lot, and I hope one day some of us can get together and do something like this. But I would love there to be like simultaneous community climate festivals that bring in local history and culture, multiple generations, and create space for education, art, expression, and organizing around community climate action. Because I think we are getting to a place where climate is becoming more real to people, but it's happening in large part because we're seeing mounting disasters happen. We're reading about it. People are experiencing that loss. And we can't rely on that to push for change. So I think connecting climate change to local histories and traditions and tapping people's imaginations about what the future could look like and what their roles could be in determining that future could really go a long way. So super passionate about that. And the next slide, just to say, please get in touch if you want to talk about Cervest, climate risk, climate policy, grief and end-of-life issues, and how I make sense of all those things in my mind. And I've also linked to some of our recent publications. But I look forward to talking to you all in the networking session and hearing any questions, reactions, or thoughts you have.
Thank you so much, Ashyln. Really impressive and important work you do. It's time for a Q&A. So let's see. I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat here. And I also heard there's questions in the Google Sheet. Michelle, I can't see the Google Sheet, but would you mind sharing the questions in there? Unless, of course, also everyone attending here is welcome to go off mute and ask their questions to Ashyln in person.
Well, I had a question around, what type of background do you need to get into policy work?
Yeah, well, so I studied English literature during undergrad, and I started my career working in foreign policy. This was before my climate career. I was focused a lot on US-India relations, and I did a little bit of policy work during undergrad. But I think we're living in this like virtual working world where you can do work from anywhere. I think, DC is really a hub for policy work. And at least for me, it was starting my career in a place like DC and just understanding not just how policy is made, but like who all is involved in that process. My first job was at the Council on Foreign Relations. They have a huge membership that includes academia and private sector, government officials, NGOs. And that's what opened my eyes to the importance of policy and what kinds of interests are at play. And that's a conversation that's, specific where you look. In the US, there's all kinds of interests going into policy making. And I think when it comes to climate work, and what I've been seeing is within corporate sustainability teams, and that in and of itself is becoming elevated within businesses, but you're seeing like climate policy specialists within sustainability teams. And I think that's so important. And the other thing I'll say, with the SEC rules and the disclosure of climate risks, one gap where you're starting to see more scrutiny is how corporate political activities do or do not align with the climate commitments that they're making. So I think it's, I think being in DC is like, you get that exposure you need. It's not the only way into policy, and there's, grad programs and things like that. But right now, I think we're seeing these worlds collide. And I think that's the exciting part for me about being at this intersection.
Amazing. Thank you, Ashyln. We have another one. How will companies be asked to show their climate risk data? What format, and will it be displayed publicly in a collected manner? And we might have one more question after that, just an FYI.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, right now we're trying to figure out what that looks like. The main basis for climate risk disclosure right now is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And that was a market-led initiative. So it wasn't policymakers that came together to figure it out. It was a lot of investors that said, we want to see this information so that it can inform our investment decisions. And the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD, makes 11 recommendations for how these risks should be disclosed. Right now, if you look at TCFD reports, there's like huge variation and levels of like comprehensiveness in what's being disclosed. And there isn't really a uniform way right now. The TCFD has put out guidance on what metrics might be useful and that could we look towards standardization on. But right now, I think that would be awesome to be able to see like a database of climate risk disclosed in a standard way. And we're not there yet. I think with the ISSB framework coming out next year, that's going to kind of provide guidance to regulators around the world. We'll probably see a little bit more consolidation around some of those metrics. And one that we use at Cervest is called climate value at risk, which allows you to put like an actual number or a percentage of a value of an asset that might be at risk to climate change. But yeah, I think that's kind of the next phase.
Okay, awesome, Ashyln. I want to squeeze in one more question from Tiffany. Do you want to come off mute, Tiffany, or do you want me to read it out loud?
Yeah, I'll come off mute. I just, I feel a little intimidated by policy. It's not an easy space for me to be in. And I think that signing petitions is likely a very easy way to get involved at a lower level, but I'm just not sure how impactful petitions are. Like, do they really make a difference?
Yeah, I definitely think they do. I think it's complicated, especially because of things like, Citizens United Supreme Court ruling in the US that has allowed corporations to have like outsized influence in policymaking. And the reality too is that like there's just so much gridlock right now. And so I think it's hard to see immediate outcomes from something like signing on to petitions. But if you look at what the Biden administration has been able to accomplish, even with political gridlock, I think any way that we can, as a democracy, show support for climate action is reinforcing to all the creativity that the Biden administration is using to make progress on climate action. So, I wouldn't like discount any of that. And policy is like a confusing, technical, and like in many ways antiquated process. So I think it's great. And I actually heard, I think it was Bernie Sanders, director for climate work, saying, I think it was a similar magic wand question, what would you do? And her answer was like, we need climate civic education right now. And we need people to understand like what's even on the table right now, policy-wise, for climate action. So, I don't know when or if we will see more of that, but I hope so.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ashyln. I think that's all the questions we have.
Thank you, Ashyln. Super insightful. All right, let's move on to our second speaker for today, Laura. The stage is yours, the virtual staging.
Thank you. If you could go to the next slide, please, Stephanie. This slide, I have a cat who's going to start howling. I apologize for that. I can't put him on mute. Hopefully he'll behave. This slide pretty much sums up the last 26, 27 years of my life. I had a long career working for Westfield, negotiating leases for their shopping centers in their North American portfolio. And the picture here is Westfield Century City. I served on the asset team for the $1.1 billion redevelopment expansion of the shopping center. And then the pandemic hit, and April of 2020, my career with Westfield ended. But thankfully I had a master's degree going on. So I used my unplanned sabbatical to finish my master's degree. And well, as Ashyln was saying, you know, going back to school and having plans for things to go one way and they go another way, I intended when I went to Thunderbird to I guess acquire new skills so that I could continue to advance within Westfield. But from my very first case study in my very first class, which was about global thermostat, it reignited my passion for climate. I had put climate kind of on the side thinking, there's just nothing I can really do about it. So I took some time I got my degree in real estate. I worked for Westfield, I raised my kids. And then suddenly, pandemic hits and everything changes. So I ended up graduating in December of 2020. And then in January, through Air Miners, I met my co-founders and we started Thanks a Ton. So when I started working with my co-founders, we were working on a different problem through Air Miners, which was trying to make sense of the voluntary carbon market. And we were getting together regularly and meeting, and it was very frustrating because we felt like we weren't going to have the technology to try and solve the voluntary carbon market issues. And Kara, one of my co-founders in Paris, Michelle knows her, she just made the pun one day, Thanks a Ton. Oh, we should make a company called that, and we should sell gift cards. And so the idea was born. It took a few months before we figured out maybe that's something we really want to do. But the big discussion at the time was how no one has heard of carbon dioxide removal or CDR. And we need to change that because it's a very important climate solution pathway. So our mission from the very beginning was to educate people about CDR, what it is, why it's so important, and then promote public acceptance and engagement so we could help to grow the entire CDR ecosystem. So we created a website. We put a lot of information about CDR on it, about why we need it and the different methods. And our audience is mainstream people who are concerned about climate change, who want to act but have no idea what to do. So, so that's why we chose cards, because people are familiar with greeting cards. And then we chose CDR and the different methods, in part based on what was available to buy. I'll get to that in a minute. But we wanted people who don't really know very much about climate change to be able to come to our website and get snippets of bite-sized information that was accurate and easily accessible. So I was inspired by the 1980s slogan, reuse, reduce, recycle. We've been using that slogan a long time. We still use it. And it was so simple that people could think about what they were consuming and make decisions, perhaps make decisions to consume differently. So I made a list of 3 things we need to do to fight climate change. I'm sorry, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. So the 3 things we need to do to fight climate change are reduce emissions all the way to 0, adapt to live in our changing climate, and 3, remove CO2 from our atmosphere. So I think if people can remember these 3 things and start thinking in these terms, it's a beginning. And we have to start somewhere and try to keep it simple to get people on board with it, because everything after that is really hard to do. So getting back to the supply constraint issue, the quality carbon dioxide removal credits are highly constrained. The technologies that are going to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere are nascent. The industry is nascent. So we need to support these companies to get off the ground so that we can eventually reach gigaton scale carbon removal. So battling against the 2-part issue of the supply constraint and the fact these credits are really expensive. My co-founder Siobhan, who lives in Mexico City, and I went back to the drawing board this year, and we tried to figure out a different way to pair carbon dioxide removal with greening cards. So we partnered with Patch, and that allows us to sell carbon credits in small, affordable pieces and pair them with our cards. We built a new website on Shopify, which we were happy with because they're so supportive of the CDR industry, and break the carbon removal credits into affordable chunks which people could afford to buy. And that supported our mission of education. And we launched our new website about October 1st. Next slide, please, Stephanie. Okay, oh, thank you. Okay, so because our audience is mostly people who don't know very much about climate change, and climate science is really complex, we're approaching our messaging a little bit differently. We're not focused on the deep science. We want to follow the science, but we're trying to keep our messaging simple. So I'm a non-science person. I have a degree in real estate. So a lot of the discussions go over my head, but like I can get the basics. So the way I grasped it and the way I explain it to other people now is, if you've never heard of CDR, here's why we need it. We had about 290 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So I don't know, 170 years ago, give or take. And scientists think about 350 parts per million is safe. I'm actually not too sure about that, but it doesn't matter, that ship sailed, because we're actually at 420. So explaining it like that, people get it. They get quiet, they think for a minute, and they're like, oh. And from there, we can start to have a conversation about why this pathway is needed. And we absolutely support reducing emissions. We need that too. And adaptation is going to be hard, but we also need to remove CO2. So trying to get people to understand we need to do all 3 things. So I attended Verge in October, and they talked a lot about the supply constraints and how endemic that issue is in the CDR world. But I also got to hear some of the people who are running Frontier speak, and I was just so inspired by what they're doing. They're creating demand on a macro scale for CDR credits. They're building this coalition of companies that helps them to help create the demand, to support and incentivize the companies that are building CDR to invest in the R&D and scale the technologies. At present, the removal capacity is in the thousands of tons. It's growing. The list of companies is also growing, but it's still less than 2 dozen. So that's how the macro side of the equation is working. We're approaching from the opposite end. we want to reach as many people as we can who are willing to spend $25, $50, $75, $100 to send a card with removed carbon and include education with that. So we care deeply about reaching gigaton scale removal, but our goal is for people to learn about and support the CDR technologies and engage in them. And we're also thinking ahead in the future. These technologies are going to need to be cited in various communities around the country. We want people in those local communities to know what CDR is and understand the value of it and support the technology, not just because it'll bring jobs, but because we need these solutions and they're part of the climate change fight. So I'm on my last couple seconds. I guess that's pretty much it. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't say. If I could wave a magic wand, we need to make sales. So we need wisdom to find our product market fit better and faster. And to add levity, this is my personal Christmas card. I'm sending out thanks a ton cards for Christmas. And I'm going to hit my friends and family over the head with climate change on my tree. And I thought my cats would just make it fun. So that's everything I have.
And that's the tree right here. Thank you so much, Laura. Really
Thank you.
inspiring work. And I love what you said at the beginning, like you didn't think there was anything you could do. I think that's also how a lot of people feel, how I felt at the beginning of my climate journey. But yeah, then it turns out there are things we can do, even if we don't have a green degree or any special training. As long as you're passionate and willing to educate yourself, there's actually a lot you can do with your existing skills. That was my personal learning, and I think you're a wonderful example of that. So let's see, time for Q&A. Any questions here? Smart to tap into existing behaviors like sending cards to help the education effort is what Kirsten is saying in the chat. Yes, I totally agree. Any questions on the Google Sheet, Michelle?
Yes, I have a question, which is, you know, how has the corporate response been, if any, in terms of offering this as a way to reward employees instead of like an Amazon gift card?
Well, companies, we've sold our first package. We have a second package that we're working on now. We started exploring the B2B aspect of it. We built the B2C component because that was a little easier to build, but we will be branching out B2B in the coming year. It just makes sense. So we can still accomplish our goal of educating people. And it's a little bit easier if you don't have to go one person at a time. But companies are expressing interest, and there are a number of companies out there that provide these kind of extra benefits to companies. I didn't know they even existed, but there's actually a big market for that. So I've talked to a number of them, and in the coming year, we will be reaching out to see if we can offer these kinds of services.
Awesome, thank you.
I have a question about one of your capture methods for reforestation. How do you know that the trees are planted and then also actually make it past like a sapling?
Well, our original partner was a company that was reforesting 2% of Ireland. And we know these companies because we have relationships with them. So Kara had the relationship with that company. Thankfully, they've been pretty successful with their project, and they had sold out of credits. So we partnered now with Living Carbon. They're a company that genetically modifies trees that grow faster and stronger and sequester more carbon than a typical tree. So they are planting trees that are meant to be harvested in areas where we have been harvesting trees. So they go in and they plant their trees, they grow for a period of time, and they sequester the most carbon during the growth phase in their kind of adolescent stage. And then when they reach maturity, then they're harvested and used for lumber. And another co-benefit is they produce stronger lumber. So that's the model for living carbon. We're very careful about the methods we select and we want to have relationships with them because we want to tell their compelling stories. We think individuals will respond to that.
Yeah, I think you
So
definitely have
that's
an
why,
audience that's hungry for information.
yeah, so that's
I
why we
didn't
chose
see
them.
living carbon on the website. Will you put your partnerships on the website?
Do have them on there. I think it's on the about page, maybe. Let's see.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah, we list them towards the end. Carbon partners.
Gotcha. Great, thanks,
Are they
Laura.
on here? Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Sure, thank you.
I have one more question with just 1 minute left, Laura. One thing that I like to share as well is like our planet is 30% land and 70% ocean. When it comes to land, a lot of it is used for, cities and farming and communities. And so there's a limited amount of land that we can actually plant trees. And so I think looking to the ocean is really important. And I can probably see on your website afterwards, but do you offer any type of ocean related credits?
Not at present, but we will be in Q1. We're connecting with Running Tide right now. We just want to have a relationship before we put them on our website. So Running Tide is the carbon partner that we intend to use next year. We already have a beautiful card already prepared for it. The other method we intend to add is DAC. Direct air capture is one of the solutions, and if we can make it work so that we're not expending more energy, then we're actually removing CO2. And companies are creating those formulas. We need to do it.